All right, Howard, welcome. We are going to talk about the work that you do at the intersection between AI and I guess what I would call the CFO office. So about really helping finance professionals do a better job. And I read somewhere that you came to this as a former CFO who got fed up with watching cash silently walk out of the door that no one realized. So maybe double click on this, and what was your journey to starting the company and the inspiration?
So my background, I'm a former CFO. Before starting Glean, I was the CFO of Better, the mortgage company here in New York. And then before that, I spent 10 years at On Deck Capital, another fintech pioneer. In each of those roles, at least once a year, I'd task my finance team with trying to figure out where can we squeeze our vendors and where were the savings opportunities. So what they would do is first figure out who are the top 50 vendors, and then we'd print out the last 12 months of invoices. And by the way, just finding the invoices was difficult. If we were using Bill.com, we could get them there, but if something was being charged to a credit card, it was probably in someone's inbox. We'd try to locate the contract, and that was sometimes challenging. But then we would do just very manual analysis of, all right, what are we purchasing? What are the trends? What's the unit price? Does the unit price match what's in the contract? What's the volume trends? What's the KPI that's driving this service or product? And then we'd come up with a bunch of questions. And we'd also just pick up on hey, we got charged a late fee here, or this thing just doesn't make sense. And we'd ask the budget owners, tell us about these charges. Do we need this vendor? Can we consolidate spend with these other vendors? Can we move to an annual deal? All the typical questions that you would ask in an FP&A type of budgeting session. And we'd really grill them. And inevitably, we'd find errors, we'd find consolidation opportunities, we'd play bad guy in negotiations, but we'd find about 10% of savings opportunities each time we conducted this exercise. The last time we did it was in 2019, and at Better, the run rate on vendor spend at the time was about $15 million annually, and we've identified $1.5 million of savings. So I said to myself, wow, that was a really productive exercise, but my team hates me. We just spent 3 weeks going through all these invoices and bills, but it's a very tedious manual process. And why is software not helping us? Because these are very data-rich documents. They're machine-readable documents created by a piece of software, and we're just kind of re-engineering what a billing platform knows. So that was my first kind of realization. And the second one was we use Bill.com, this is at Better, and we have a very sophisticated approval process. It wasn't just going to finance every time a bill came in, it was going to the department heads as well. And why were we not detecting the same savings opportunities that my team did during the typical AP approval process? So the more I dug into that question, the more I realized, well, when they get the first email, it gets ignored. It's not until they get the second or third email when they have a queue of 5 bills in Bill.com that they log in, they do a quick sanity check, and then they select all approve. So they're not getting any scrutiny of the bill. But to the extent they actually did want to review a bill, there's no context or analytics to give them comfort that that bill should be approved or denied. And when I actually analyzed what our approval rate was at Better, 99 out of 100 bills were getting approved. It defeated the whole purpose of the whole approval process. So I realized it presented a huge opportunity to provide analytics. If a legal bill comes in and it's up 20%, well, why, right? Did we add another project? Did the number of hours go up? Did a partner get involved and the blended rate went up as a result? So I saw it just a significant opportunity to be much more strategic and proactive at having these conversations and identifying that money before it leaked out.
Great. So Glean, I read somewhere one should think of it as Bill.com, but with a brain. Is that the idea? So meaning that you build both the sort of core workflow infrastructure of Bill.com, but also add AI?
Yeah, we took a first principles approach to say, listen, if we're collecting all this data, what else can we be doing? So in addition to standard, what's called AP automation, which is bill comes in, invoice gets extracted, and then you can sync it to your accounting system and get it approved and get it paid. we were like, all right, well, how about we do vendor intake? So if a team wants to bring on a new vendor, let's have a flow for that and support approvals for that. If you want to set up a budget for your vendors, let's set up monthly budgets. So when the bill comes in, we're comparing it to a budget, not just to last month, but we can get an alert that day that you were over budget. And every bill is like, you can conduct a variance analysis to any prior bill to see what changed. So there's a lot of functionality that, again, took like a first principles approach to say, how do we just be much more strategic in terms of managing and optimizing our vendor relationships and spend?
And maybe for anybody who doesn't follow this particular space of software for the CFO office, Bill.com is ultimately a startup. Like, they've been around for 15 years. I mean, it's a public company, but it's not a super old company, but that's been doing incredibly well and has reached over $1 billion in sales and is currently at a $10 billion market cap, and at some point was at over $30 billion market cap. So those are very sort of juicy, meaty part of the enterprise, where there's actually a long history of very successful companies being built. For anybody who thinks that, AP for accounts payable is like a niche market, it's actually gigantic.
Yeah. Every business needs to pay their vendors.
Yes. So how did you get started? What was the first thing that you built, and when did you start the company?
Yeah. So I had the idea in late 2019. We had our like pre-seed round in early 2020, like right as COVID was kind of happening. We started building just like models to ingest documents. So from like an AI perspective, what we need to do is when we receive a document, like determine what type of document is it? Is it an invoice? Is it a receipt? Is it a billing statement? We can gather intelligence from those types of documents. If it's a contract, maybe it's like an NDA, maybe it's like a remittance slip. That's not something that is going to get processed. So we have to determine what type of document it is first. Once it's a document, like we know it's a document that we can analyze, then who is the canonical vendor? So we have to build models, and this is all done with like NLP models, like back in the day before like LLM existed. But like who's the canonical vendor? We had to differentiate between Google Ads versus like Google Workspace versus Google Cloud, and like all the different taxonomy that exists with that. At the vendor level, then extracting all the elements off of a page, and it could be invoice date, due date, all the various fields. But the thing that made us very unique is we're extracting all the line items too. So what are you purchasing, for what dates, what's the unit price, what's the quantity you're ordering? And, for any specific item, like how do we think about that canonically? And we've built like a lot of AI around the mapping of raw text on an invoice to like what is the true canonical product or service being offered.
And so you build those models initially, and then you added some commercial LLMs. I mean, I guess, how did you evolve your machine learning stack as this whole generative AI popped up?
Yeah, initially we started with using like OCR vendors on the extraction piece. A lot of the mapping models were models that we developed in-house. And then over time, we saw that the predictive value of the OCR vendors were no longer adding like the information value we can get versus like an ensemble model of like proprietary models were not worth the cost of maintaining those relationships. So it became like 100% proprietary, again, like an NLP ensemble model. But over the course of the last 12 to 18 months, we've done a 100% shift to LLM modeling for the complete stack. And we're using Vertex and OpenAI. And we're starting to experiment with Claude.
Yeah. Did you find that it would just completely trounced the prior state of the art?
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, the accuracy rates are better. Our cost to compute has gone down. And like it is the data scientist. We don't need a team to do annotations anymore for the models. And it's like our gross margins have done like 2 step functions over the course of the year as a result.
Obviously, for the world of finance, bills that need to be paid and all the things like that's pretty exact. Like, you'd better sort of get it right. How far can you go into automation? What is the role of the human as a reviewer or otherwise?
Yeah, so I'm still learning from my team on some of this stuff. One of the drawbacks of using LLMs is like we're not receiving confidence scores on the extractions. So like one thing that we've created is we're pulling from multiple LLMs, and like that's like a substitute or a proxy for like confidence score. When we have our proxy for confidence score is kind of lower, we will send it to a human team for review and validation. And also anytime we see if like it's a vendor we haven't seen before, so we haven't mapped that vendor from a canonical perspective, it's going to go for a human review just for validation at least.
The one sort of question, not just for you, but like in general, like how do you think about defensibility for the business as you build on top of commercial LLM vendors?
Yeah, so I think two things. One, we have a really rich history of like the diversity of invoice structure. Like I mentioned before, like what are the true canonical items? So for any like product or service, like what's the billing? Is it billed quarterly? Is it billed annually? And, you know, for each type, what's the pricing difference? We've built like the data model that understands all the gradation that we see across like the supplier landscape. We also, like that data model supports, and I think we're unique in this regard, a view of what's being purchased, not just on an individual invoice, but like over time. So we, unlike like our competitors, like we can feed an LLM a CSV file that doesn't just say, hey, tell me what's on this one specific invoice, but here's the history with this vendor. We're going to do the calculations because the LLMs are very poor at that. And then we can say, and like this is in development right now, but like tell us all the interesting things. And then we can say, here are 10 examples of us, or 10 other files, but 10 great observations, and give us a text-based summary of the story of this bill. And like we've demoed it, like this beta feature to a couple of customers, and like it's like wowing them. But like no one else can do that because they don't have that history and that like the structure of the data model to be able to serve it up that way.
Since you mentioned customers, you want to go into a couple of success stories?
Yeah, well, we just did a case study with a company called League Apps. So it's like fresh in mind. One of his suggestions, or we call them gleans. So we took the verb to glean insights, and we made a noun out of it in our product. So you get your glean list. So they had a Salesforce negotiation coming up, and one of our gleans was basically pointing out that they were overpaying for, I forgot what the specific service was for Salesforce. But then in this case study, he reported back that in the contract negotiation, and we provide benchmarking data. That's part of the service that we offer, because we can compare your pricing to what our other customers are paying. And we know, like, we can compare the same number of seats, et cetera. So we gave him benchmarking data, and he reported back that they saved $20K versus their prior contract. So that's just fresh in mind. And then he also said, like, he estimates that Glean, like, the value is like 2 to 3% of non-payroll spend in terms of like how the team collaborates and like how we help save across the board. But the best part of my job is when I get an email from a CEO, not even a CFO, but like a CEO who's become a power user of Glean, and they say, "You've helped us change our spend culture." Like that's the problem I helped to solve. I wanted to solve when starting Glean, and people were acting like drunken sailors with budgets, and now it's like the spenders are feeling much more accountable and acting much more like owners.
So if you imagine yourself back in your CFO job at Better or on deck, you would need less people. Would that be the impact, or how do you think of it in terms of ROI? Is that less people? Is that faster processing of spend?
I think the value prop is twofold. What I was just describing was more the savings opportunity, like how better visibility, better collaboration leads to better decisions, and then that leads to more cash flow. And you can decide to like reinvest that back into the business. The person who provided the case study, he also estimated that like from an automation perspective, we're saving half like an accountant in terms of like half an FTE from a like automation perspective. So there is definitely a time savings benefit as well.
Okay, very cool. What's next? What's the plan for the next year or two?
Yeah, there's a lot that we're working on. Right now, every bill goes to get approved. And I think using AI, like we should be able to say, this bill's been the same or within a specific parameter within the last 6 months. And as a result, it shouldn't need approval. And we should suggest what the policy should be. So I think there's opportunity to, like, again, reduce the amount of work required and then become almost like the exception. Like, hey, this is out of bounds. We're bringing it to your attention. That's kind of one thing. Right now, like, we can tell you that you increased the number of seats on Zoom from 40 to 47 this month, but we can't tell you how many of the 47 are being utilized. So there's like forms of data integrate, like API integrations that we can do to say, all right, 40 out of the 47 are being utilized. Here are the 7 people that aren't working at the company anymore. And then maybe like have some type of workflow where you can cancel those 7. So I think there's a lot of exciting stuff to use the intelligence that we have to save money and save time.
Great. So maybe just one last question from me, and then we'll get into hands being raised, which is awesome. Thank you. We've come across a bunch of people that are fascinated by this entire boom in generative AI and can think of a problem that they've experienced in their career and want to start companies to build products based on generative AI to solve these problems. How do you, as a former CFO who doesn't come from a technical machine learning AI background, like what have you learned in terms of like how you work with these technologies, how you interface with technical people on your team, sort of this marriage of like industry expertise and technical expertise? How do you navigate that as a leader?
First off, like I'm very transparent with my team about what I don't know, right? And I asked them to teach me. So I had a teach-in the other day where we were discussing the merits of potentially bringing the modeling in-house. And someone was very opinionated on it. And I was like, I need to get up to speed here. Like, please tell me. I want to hear both sides of the argument here because I'm fascinated by this. And he just appreciated this. Like, I didn't come with an opinion. And I asked him, like, please, like, you're the expert here. Like, I need to get more up to speed here. So I think that's you just need to be realistic with like what your capabilities are. And I had a one-on-one the other day where one of the lead data engineers kind of making a lot of progress here. He's kind of siloed, and I was like, at least once a month, let's like promote your brand, like what you're doing to the rest of the organization, because I know everyone's interested in this stuff. So let's create a newsletter and send it to everyone. And he was like, oh my God, do you think they're so like interested in all the like the metrics? And like, no, like just like show some examples of like some of the cool work you're doing. But his eyes like lit up. He's like, oh, this is cool. So, yeah, give people the opportunity at your company to talk about this is really like fascinating stuff, and it's going to be game changing for industries. So allow your employees to really engage with it.
Very cool. Thank you so much. All right. So we had a couple of questions. 4 questions. Oh, my microphone.
Thank you. Hi, I am Tanya Dua. I'm the tech editor at LinkedIn News. I spoke with Matt last week, and we discussed how there's a software recession going on. Given that your product, Howard, you said people were spending like drunken sailors and, seeks to inhibit that spend, what is this sort of unrealized advantage you have over your peers? Because, there's a lot of AI-driven companies that are trying to pitch themselves. Are you eating their lunch, like as a side effect because you're helping people check their finances?
Our business is up like 3x, over 3x so far this year. I mean, on G2, our rating is 5 out of 5. I can't speak to other software firms. All I know is this was a problem where every other company I worked, and when I did Discovery back in 2019, this is before even the crazy times of 2021, every CFO I spoke to said, yeah, we know there's leakage in our vendor spend. We just can't figure out where. But if you could build software that could help pinpoint where the problem is and can promote collaboration and people asking questions, that's going to help us a lot. And that's basically what we've done. And to me, it was when I did the research in 2019, like I was amazed that no other company built this feature. And like part of it was like it was so hard, but now it's become easier with like all the AI advancements over the last couple of years.
Hey there, Ed Manzi. Thanks for speaking, Howard. One question I have is on the channels you look at for sales. Have you considered private equity firms or companies that do a lot of M&A and around like post-merger integration and helping them with vendor consolidation? I'm not sure if that's something you guys think about or when you think about it.
Not yet. I mean, my biggest challenge is no one's heard of Glean. They always confuse us with Glean.com. It's a great idea. And I think there's a lot of like industries and different approaches that would work for us. So it's a good one.
Thank you. Great talk. I was wondering, you mentioned about a conversation with one of your data scientists around in-housing your model. I feel a lot of folks are now thinking about using public models versus bringing in-house models, doing domain models. Anything you can share regarding that process to your company that wouldn't be giving anything away?
Again, I'm not the expert on it, but like I ultimately came to the view that his perspective was, from a cost perspective over time, we could have a lower cost than using the external models and continue to like fine tune and like get better results by bringing in in-house. And I think the latter is probably true, although I think their models will continue to improve, but also I think their pricing will continue to improve. So we can't just look at like where their pricing is today and assume it's going to be static over the next 12 months or 18 months, because like as they compete, their compute costs will come down. Like I think their pricing will come down too. So that was the assumption I just disagreed with, and why we decided, like, hey, for at least for now, let's continue as is, and we'll continue using the external models.
Yeah. Howard, thanks for your talk today. About the benchmarking service that you talked about, did you get any pushbacks from vendors about the service? And also from customers, did you get any pushbacks about whether to participate in the service because there's privacy and competitive reasons why, as to why someone should participate? In other cases, they may want to opt out. So what was interesting, what you may have heard from customers as well as vendors.
Yeah. So we're too small for the vendors to care yet. And then from a customer perspective, on a very rare occasion, we've had some pushback. But in our terms of service, basically, the way it works is the customer agrees that the data on the invoices can be aggregated and anonymized, basically for their own use, to provide benchmarking data back through our platform. They can opt out, though. So we give them the ability to opt out. If they opt out, they're not going to be eligible to receive the benchmarking data.
Kind of had a two-part. I think one of them kind of recently answered, but maybe I'll start with more of a comment. I'm a data scientist, and maybe like a year ago, I had a friend whose wife was working at a company where they kind of like call all their vendors and try to like reduce costs. And I didn't know that existed, but apparently it's a company that does that for other companies.
Yeah.
I would like that could be like an amazing actually use case where like because you could be ranking basically like, hey, like from like if you have like 100 vendors, and then you can rank maybe like the top 10 that you should be like renegotiating with. The other question I had was more connected to the switch from building in-house to LLM. Besides, like to the cost, and what about staff size? Did you see any like was there like more like moving people to like different projects or?
We had a team of like 3, and then we brought on like an external contractor to help. But not everyone was like focused on that full time. But it was given the cost and like savings implications, it was a significant priority for us. To your first point, though, I was amazed that most accounts payable platforms and even contract management systems, the contracts aren't stored in the same platforms as invoices. It's like, so anytime you want to go embark on a cost savings exercise, like there are 2 different platforms where you have to like download the contract from and the invoices, not with Glean.
All right, wonderful. On that note, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.